the new fish room is becoming closer and closer to being completed. We've got this rack that we're going to talk about how I built it today, and this rack over here that we also did. So in today's video, we're going to show you two racks. I guess while we're back here, we might as well take a look at the Congos, which are all doing absolutely phenomenal. Incredible. You guys see me just unbox these in the last video, in fact, and I can't get over how healthy these guys are, which makes me feel really good about adding them to the 2,000 gallon aquarium here very, very shortly. So before I even built this rack, and mind you, ignore a little bit of the mess, still obviously working on a few things. Before I built any rack, what I do is I build it in an editing program like Photoshop first. I do it in inches, I make sure the tanks will fit, how everything's going to look, because the worst thing is you build a rack like this and the bottom tanks simply don't fit in. For me, I built this rack a little bit differently than I typically would. I wanted to have a center supporting structure because if you don't know, each side is 6 feet long. This entire rack is about 13 feet long, but I didn't want it to take up too much space. So the first thing I did was build the top and bottom supports. This is essentially what the tanks will sit on. When you build these do-it-yourself stands as well as racks, we build them upside down. So this will look a little weird, but the next thing that goes on is the guides. The guides are these things here. And of course, I put them on the outside over here. These things right here go right down, and all they're doing is allowing something for the actual support systems, you know, the things that are going to take the weight of the actual stand, something to hold on to. In a rack like this, though, and with using this design, is it would take one little bump that way and it could potentially collapse. So we added in some 45-degree angles to both ends as well, giving it a tremendous amount of more strength. I also bolted it into this stud in the wall here so it doesn't kind of wobble back and forth, because this is only 12 inches, or technically 13 inches front to back, and these tanks that are on it are 15 gallons. But since Tamara wanted to be able to actually see her tanks and scape them and have them look exactly as she wants, this is how I had to build it. Now, typically speaking, when we put in a center support, and I highly suggest doing this regardless of the size and width of your supports that your tanks are sitting on, anything over 6 feet or sometimes even 8 feet, you're going to want to put in at least one center support in the front as well as in the back, because it will sag. I did one from the bottom all the way to the top. However, I made this side long enough to hold 3 tanks up top, and then directly lined up with it, we're missing one, will be 3 tanks below it. I thought this would look a little bit more symmetrical. We obviously don't have anything right here, but the tanks line up because of the braces here. I gave myself 2 extra inches as well, so instead of making this section 72 inches wide, I made it 74, because it's 12 inches of glass. It doesn't really account to this tiny little 1/4 inch of trim, or maybe 1/8 of that. So you'll always want to make sure you measure the trim itself. You'll also notice that the tanks aren't sitting on any sort of plywood because these are glass tanks. They just have to sit on the supports all around the trim. The reason being is simple. There's a lip under this glass. Even if I put supports down the middle, the supports won't be touching anything. So I've shown you guys how to do these a number of times, how to build stands and racks and this sort of thing, but never necessarily this exact design. So I definitely wanted to show you it, and then of course painted it white because everything over here is white and looking really good because it's Tamara's section. However, I also built, well, yet another concrete block stand because a couple of reasons. We already had the concrete blocks, so all I need to do is go out and buy some 2x6s that are around 14 feet long, because I'm going to put 4 4-foot long tanks on top, then a couple of 3-foot long tank in there, a 3-foot long tank in there, and then this is a 40-gallon breeder that's 36 inches long, or 3 feet, because this is going to be the sump. The top tanks are all going to feed into this sump, and it will return individually. All tanks will be on ball valves, so I can control all the flow and stop the flow from not only returning, but draining. So if anything ever happens in a tank, I can isolate it, and then these tanks will be standalone systems, so they'll just have sponge filters or maybe even some sort of mat and filter like we capitalized over in this tank here. Now, I don't have nearly as much room to move around, but these will be holding and breeding tanks. I don't need enough room. I don't need that much room to begin with. But I built this exactly as I built this one. Same distance. In fact, these size tanks are actually what's going to be going on the bottom in here. And then the top tanks, just like that one, is this one. You guys will remember I built all of these acrylic tanks. So it's kind of like a complete do-it-yourself system where I built all the tanks, building the stand, we're building the filtration. And of course, water changes for this system, I'll just do it through the sump. Whatever I drain from the sump and then fill back up, dilutes to the rest of the tanks. But because these 2x6s are laying on their sides, they would bow by a tremendous amount. So we have to have bracing at the ends of all of them. And you'll notice that this tank is sitting on concrete. And then, of course, over here as well. However, when we put the next one in, there would be about a hand's width in between them, but one edge will sit here, and the other edge will sit here as well, negating any type of bowing, and then obviously it goes on and on. Down below, that bowing is less likely to happen because the pressure of this tank up here is pushing down on them, kind of like holding it steady for this one to sit on. And if we look closely, there's no bowing at all. But as we slowly back away from these stands, we can now see we have a do-it-yourself racking system, a do-it-yourself double stand, a do-it-yourself regular stand that you guys know how to build and I showed you, and then of course a concrete and wooden board rack. So I'm giving you guys a tremendous amount of options and things to kind of pull from and figure out for your own fish rooms and or your aquariums, whether you want to build a rack out of 2x4s or 2x6s, whether you kind of want to build a rack more like this, build this just a regular stand like that, or maybe a concrete block stand like this one over here, all of which we have videos on all of these types of builds. Now that I have this stand built and I've got it painted, the next thing I got to do is install the next two tanks and the ones on the bottom, and then start plumbing them, directing towards the sump, which we have to finish building as well. And that might be potentially one of the next videos. We'll see how everything goes, but I do have a number of other little projects we have to complete in the aquarium gallery first. I mean, for me personally, I prefer the white look, very clean looking and brightens up the room. Let me know what you guys think. Do you like the black area over there or the whitened area over here? I guess over on the other side, there would be less light, infraction, less reflections and whatnot. But this is just such a bright and lit up area, even though it's only lit up by a few aquariums right now, as opposed to being lit up by any ambient lighting. I think one of my favorite things about these types of racks as well is the fact that these tanks are off the floor, even though the distance you see here matches down there. So we could technically fit in a couple of more tanks, which was the plan, just on the floor as, you know, emergency tanks or quarantine tanks. However, we have to avoid these side braces, so that's why we could only put two in there. Or maybe even like a 4-foot tank that has these dimensions, like 4 by 1 by 1, something like that. I might have to custom build it, but interesting. Which reminds me of something is underneath these 180s, there's almost 5 feet by 2 feet of width. I think they need more tanks too. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this project, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know that building stands, I don't know how many times I've done it, but that goes to show how long we've been doing this and kind of teaching these types of projects, as well as we've shown how to build everything so many darn times. And if you do have favorite types of projects, let me know in the comment section below, and maybe I can focus on them a little bit more. However, when building out a fish room, one of the most important and biggest projects you can do is the racking system, because once that's done, well, there's no real turning back. And by all means, when you're building your racks, make sure you can get your head in between them. Trust me, it's great for scaping and maintenance. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.